I had always imagined that if my marriage were to fall apart, it would be from something catastrophic, something that would leave no room for doubt. Maybe a dramatic confrontation, an explosive fight. But instead, it began with a quiet, almost imperceptible shift in the air between us. It was so subtle that at first I brushed it aside, convincing myself that all marriages go through phases, that we were just in a rough patch. But now, as I sit here in the dark, my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, I realize how wrong I was. This wasn't just a phase. This was the end, and I had been too blind to see it. The moment I saw those messages on his phone, everything inside me collapsed. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't looking for anything specific. But something had been gnawing at me for weeks, a nagging sense that something was off. And tonight, when he left his phone on the kitchen counter, I made the mistake of trusting that instinct. There it was. A name I didn't recognize, Sarah. I opened the chat and my world ended. At first, I couldn't make sense of the words. It was like reading a foreign language, one I didn't want to understand. But as the messages sank in, the truth became all too clear. They were flirtatious, intimate in a way that stabbed me deep in my gut. There were even pictures, selfies exchanged, his goofy smile in one, her smirking in another. My stomach turned as I scrolled further, heart pounding in my chest. I felt a scream rising in my throat, but I choked it down. I couldn't believe it. My hands started shaking, and the phone slipped from my grip, clattering to the floor. I wanted to run, to scream, to confront him, but I couldn't move. My legs felt like lead, and my mind was a whirlwind of betrayal, disbelief, and soul-crushing pain. I had given him everything, my heart, my trust, my life. We'd been together for 10 years, married for 7, and in all that time, I had never once doubted his love for me. Sure, we had our ups and downs like any couple, but this was a betrayal I never saw coming. He was upstairs, probably asleep by now, blissfully unaware of the destruction he'd just caused. How long had this been going on? How could I have missed the signs? All the late nights at work, the mysterious texts he'd brush off, the sudden distant looks during dinner. I had chalked it up to stress, to the strain of everyday life. I never thought it would be because of another woman. A wave of nausea hit me, and I bolted to the bathroom, barely making it in time before I was hunched over the toilet, my body rejecting the truth I had just uncovered. The physical pain was nothing compared to the searing agony tearing through my chest. How could he do this to me? To us? I stumbled back into the bedroom, feeling like a ghost in my own home. Our home. The place where we built our lives together, where we laughed, loved, and dreamed of the future. And now it was all tainted, poisoned by his betrayal. I collapsed onto the bed, tears blurring my vision as I stared at the ceiling. I tried to steady my breathing, but it was no use. The sobs came hard and fast, shaking my entire body. It felt like I was suffocating, drowning in a sea of grief and rage. When I finally had the strength to sit up, I glanced at the clock. It was 2 a.m. I couldn't stay in this house, not like this. Not with him. I needed to get out, to clear my head, to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. But where could I go? I didn't want to call anyone, didn't want to admit out loud what was happening. That would make it too real. And I wasn't ready to face that reality just yet. I grabbed my coat and my car keys, my hands still shaking, and slipped out of the house as quietly as I could. The cold night air hit me like a slap to the face, but it was nothing compared to the icy void that had taken over my heart. As I drove aimlessly through the dark, empty streets, I replayed every moment of our relationship in my mind, trying to pinpoint when things had changed. When had I lost him? Was it my fault? Had I pushed him away somehow? No, I couldn't do that to myself. This wasn't on me. He was the one who lied, who betrayed me. But even as I told myself that, I couldn't shake the crushing weight of failure settling over me. The truth was, I didn't know how to survive this. I didn't know who I was without him, without the life we had built together. I didn't know how to move forward when every step felt like it was ripping me apart. The next morning I barely slept. I had driven around for hours, finally pulling into a parking lot near the beach just as the sun began to rise. I watched the waves crash against the shore, the rhythmic sound doing nothing to calm the storm raging inside me. I knew I couldn't avoid him forever. Eventually I had to go back. I had to confront him. The thought made me feel sick all over again, but I had no choice. This was my life. Our life. and he had ruined it. When I walked through the front door, the house was eerily quiet. I half expected him to be gone, but as I stepped into the living room, there he was, sitting on the couch with a cup of coffee, his eyes flicking to the clock as I entered. "Where were you?" His voice was casual, like he hadn't just obliterated my entire world with his lies. I stood there for a moment just staring at him, wondering how he could be so calm, so normal, when everything between us had been shattered. The anger surged up inside me, overwhelming the sadness for the first time since I'd found the messages. "I saw your phone last night," I said, my voice shaking with fury. "I saw the messages." His face drained of color, and for a split second, I saw panic flash in his eyes before he composed himself. What messages? Don't lie to me," I shouted, my voice cracking. "Sarah. Who is she?" He opened his mouth, then closed it, running a hand through his hair. "It's not what you think." "Oh really?" I laughed bitterly. "Because it sure looks like you've been seeing someone behind my back." "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Those 2 words broke me. I didn't want his apology. I wanted my life back. I wanted the man I thought I knew, the one who promised to love me forever, to be faithful, to be my partner in everything. But that man was gone. Maybe he had never existed at all. "How long?" I asked, my voice a harsh whisper. "How long have you been lying to me?" He looked down at his hands, unable to meet my gaze. "A few months." Months. Months of lies, months of pretending everything was fine while he was with her. I felt like I was going to be sick again. Why? It was the only question that mattered now. Why had he done this? Why had he destroyed everything we had? He finally looked up at me, his eyes filled with something that looked like guilt, but it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. "I don't know," he said, shaking his head. "It just happened." I stood there staring at him, my heart breaking all over again. It just happened. That was his excuse. Like it was some kind of accident, like he had tripped and fallen into another woman's arms. "That's it," I said, my voice cold. "That's all you have to say? It just happened?" He didn't answer. He just sat there, looking at me with those sad, guilty eyes, and I realized that nothing he could say would ever fix this. There was no explanation that would make this better. No apology that could undo the damage he had done. I had a choice to make. I could walk away, leave him and this broken marriage behind, or I could try to pick up the pieces to rebuild what he had destroyed. But as I stood there, staring at the man I had loved for so long, I didn't know if I had the strength to do either. The days that followed were a blur. We didn't speak much, didn't touch. We moved around each other like strangers in our own home, both of us knowing that the unspoken decision was looming over us. We could either fight for this marriage or let it die. I kept waiting for him to do something, to say something that would show me he was worth fighting for. But every day passed in silence, and with every minute that ticked by, my heart hardened a little more. I began to imagine a life without him, started thinking about what it would be like to wake up one day and not feel this crushing weight on my chest. Maybe it would be better, maybe I could find happiness again, alone or with someone else. Someone who wouldn't betray me the way he had. But just as I began to think I could move on, he came to me one night, his face pale, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. "I don't want to lose you," he said, his voice breaking. For a moment I almost believed him. His words hung in the air between us, thick with desperation. "I don't want to lose you." But was it true? Or was he just afraid of the consequences of his actions catching up to him? Afraid of being alone? I stared at him, feeling the familiar sting of tears rising, but I was too exhausted to cry anymore. I was hollow, emptied out by the pain, the confusion, and the sheer weight of the betrayal. How could he even say that after what he'd done? "You should have thought of that before," I said, my voice cold and flat. He flinched at my words, his shoulders sagging as if the weight of them had physically struck him. For a split second I saw the man I had married, the man I thought I would grow old with. But that man was long gone. Now standing before me was someone I barely recognized. A stranger wearing my husband's face. I know I messed up," he said, his voice cracking. He ran his hands through his hair again, a nervous habit I used to find endearing. Now it just reminded me of how he looked when he was lying, scrambling for an excuse. "But I didn't mean for this to happen." I love you, Emma. I never stopped loving you. I felt a bitter laugh bubbling up inside me, and before I could stop it, it escaped. Love? This was love? Sneaking around behind my back for months with another woman, lying to my face every single day, that was his version of love? If it was, I wanted no part of it. You have a funny way of showing it, I said, crossing my arms over my chest as if that could somehow protect me from the raw, exposed wound he'd left behind. He took a step toward me, his eyes pleading. I was stupid, okay? I don't even know why I did it. It didn't mean anything, Emma, I swear. There it was again. The excuses, the meaningless justifications. As if he could undo the damage by downplaying it. As if telling me it didn't mean anything would somehow erase the months of deceit, the humiliation, the pain. But it meant something to me. I snapped, my voice rising, finally letting the anger out. It meant everything to me. This marriage, this life we built together, it meant something. You threw it away for what? For some fling? And now you're standing here telling me it didn't mean anything? Do you even hear yourself? He dropped his head into his hands, his body sagging under the weight of his guilt. I'm sorry, he whispered again, but the words were empty. Apologies meant nothing to me anymore. They couldn't take back the nights he spent with her. The lies he told. The betrayal that had gutted me from the inside out. I wanted to scream at him, to hit him, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain he had caused me. But I didn't. Instead, I stood there, my arms wrapped tightly around myself, staring at him as he fell apart in front of me. I can't do this, Tom, I said, my voice quieter now, the rage slowly giving way to exhaustion. I don't even know who you are anymore. He lifted his head, his eyes wide with panic. Please, Emma, don't say that. We can fix this. We can go to counseling, we can fix this. I interrupted, shaking my head. You can't fix this. You broke us, Tom. You broke me. The silence that followed was suffocating. He opened his mouth as if to argue, but no words came out. What could he possibly say? What excuse could he give that would make any of this better? I turned away from him, unable to look at his face any longer. I needed space, distance, anything to escape the suffocating pain that was pressing down on my chest. I need time, I said quietly. I need to think. Emma, please, he pleaded, his voice breaking. Don't leave. Please. I swallowed hard, my throat tight with the tears I was holding back. I'm not leaving. But I need you to go. I need space, Tom. I can't think with you here. He didn't argue this time. He just stood there for a long moment, staring at me like he was memorizing my face, as if he knew that once he walked out the door, something between us would be lost forever. Finally, he nodded, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Okay, I'll give you space. Without another word, he turned and left the house, the door closing softly behind him. And with that, I was alone. The first few days after Tom left were agonizing. The silence of the house was unbearable, every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside seemed to remind me of what had happened. I felt haunted, like his betrayal was an invisible presence that followed me from room to room. I tried to keep busy, to distract myself from the thoughts that swirled endlessly in my mind, but nothing worked. Everywhere I looked, I saw reminders of our life together. Our wedding photo on the mantel, the mug he always used sitting on the kitchen counter, the throw blanket on the couch that we had curled up under countless times, talking about our future, our dreams. Now all those things felt like lies. The worst part was the doubt. I kept replaying everything over and over in my head, wondering if I had missed something, if I had somehow contributed to this. Had I been too focused on work? Too distant? Had I pushed him away without realizing it? But then the anger would come rushing back. No, this wasn't my fault. I hadn't done anything to deserve this. He had made the choice to cheat. He had made the decision to betray me. And yet, despite everything, I couldn't shake the part of me that still loved him. The part that wanted to believe he was truly sorry, that we could somehow find a way to fix this. I hated that part of myself. I hated that I still cared about him even after everything he had done. But after spending a decade with someone, how do you just turn off those feelings? How do you let go of the love that once defined your life? I didn't know what to do. I felt like I was standing at a crossroads, but both paths seemed equally painful. I could either stay and try to rebuild what he had destroyed, Or I could walk away and start over, leaving behind the life I had spent years building. Neither option felt right. It had been nearly 2 weeks since Tom left, and I still hadn't made any decisions. I had barely spoken to anyone about what had happened. I wasn't ready for the pitying looks or the well-meaning advice from friends and family. This was something I needed to figure out on my own. But one afternoon, as I sat on the couch, staring blankly at the TV, my phone buzzed on the table. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Hello." I answered, my voice shaky from lack of sleep. There was a pause on the other end before a familiar voice spoke. "Emma." It was Sarah, the other woman. My heart stopped. I didn't say anything, too stunned to even process what was happening. Why was she calling me? What did she want? "I'm sorry for calling you like this," she said, her voice soft, almost timid. "I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I needed to talk to you." I sat up straight, gripping the phone tightly. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to say, but all I could manage was, "Why?" There was a long silence on the other end before she finally spoke again. "I didn't know he was married." Not at first. I felt a surge of anger rise in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. "And when you found out?" "I ended it," she said quickly. "As soon as I found out. I swear, Emma, I didn't know. He never told me." I didn't know whether to believe her or not, but I wasn't sure it even mattered. The damage was already done. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "Because you deserve to know the truth," she said, her voice trembling. "And because I think you should know that he's been trying to reach out to me again." The world around me seemed to tilt, and I gripped the edge of the couch to steady myself. He was still talking to her. "After everything?" "I haven't responded," she added quickly. "I blocked his number, but he's been persistent. I just thought you should know." I hung up the phone without saying another word, my hands shaking uncontrollably. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions as I paced the living room, trying to process what Sarah had just told me. Tom had lied to me, betrayed me, and now, even after I had given him space, even after he claimed to want to fix things, he was still trying to reach out to her? To the woman he had cheated on me with? The rage I had been holding in for weeks finally exploded. I grabbed my phone and dialed his number, my fingers trembling with fury. He answered after the second ring, his voice cautious. "Emma, how could you?" I spat, my voice shaking with anger. "You're still talking to her? After everything?" There was a long pause on the other end. I wasn't. I just. "Don't you dare lie to me again." I cut him off, my voice rising. "She called me. She told me everything. You've been trying to reach out to her, haven't you?" He stammered, and I could hear the panic in his voice. "It wasn't like that, I don't care what your excuses are, Tom," I said, my voice cold. "You've shown me exactly who you are, and I'm done." "Emma, please," he started, but I didn't let him finish. "No," I said, my voice firm. "This is over. I can't do this anymore." I hung up the phone, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over me. For the first time in weeks, I knew exactly what I needed to do. There was no more doubt, no more confusion. Tom had made his choice, and now I was making mine. I was done. The days that followed were hard, but they were also liberating. I filed for divorce, something I never thought I would have to do, and started the long process of rebuilding my life. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the grief would hit me out of nowhere, when the memories of our life together would overwhelm me, and I would find myself crying in the middle of the night, alone in our bed. But slowly, day by day, I began to heal. I started seeing a therapist, talking through the pain, the betrayal, and learning how to move forward. And for the first time in a long time, I started to think about me. What I wanted, what I needed. I had spent so much of my life thinking about us, about our future, that I had forgotten how to be just Emma. I reconnected with old friends, threw myself into my work, and started taking care of myself in a way I hadn't in years. I started running again, something I used to love but had stopped doing when life got too busy. I took a pottery class, went out with friends, and even started thinking about traveling, something Tom had never been interested in, but I had always dreamed of doing. It wasn't perfect. There were still hard days, still moments of doubt, but I was stronger than I had ever realized, and with each passing day, I felt a little more like myself again. I wasn't sure what the future held, But for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. This wasn't the life I had planned, but maybe it was the life I was meant to have. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new. Months passed. The divorce papers had been signed, and with them, a chapter of my life officially closed. I thought I would feel more relief when it was all over, but in truth, there was a strange emptiness that followed the finalization. Even though I knew it was the right decision, it was still hard to accept that something I had devoted so many years to, our marriage, our life together, was now nothing more than a legal document, a statistic. I sold the house. Staying there felt impossible. Every corner, every room was filled with memories of Tom and me. Good memories, bad memories, but all of them tainted now. I wanted a fresh start, a clean slate. So I moved into a small apartment downtown, far from the suburban life we'd once shared. It was nothing fancy, but it was mine. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had control over something in my life. At first, the loneliness was overwhelming. After a decade of living with someone, even when things were strained, there was always another presence in the house. Now I came home to silence. There was no one to cook dinner for, no one to talk about my day with. I would sit on the couch at night, staring at the TV but not really watching it, just to fill the void. But slowly, I began to appreciate the quiet. It became my space, my time to heal. I read more books than I had in years, rewatched old favorite movies, and rediscovered little hobbies I had let go of over the years. There was something peaceful about it, even if it wasn't the life I had envisioned for myself. I kept up with therapy, and it helped more than I could have imagined. I was able to unpack years of emotions, grief, anger, confusion, that I had been carrying around like heavy baggage. My therapist, Rachel, was kind but firm, guiding me through the process of understanding not just Tom's betrayal, but my own patterns, my own needs. One day, she asked me a question that stayed with me long after our session ended. "What do you want for yourself, Emma?" At the time, I didn't have an answer. I had spent so long trying to fix my marriage, trying to hold on to the life I thought I wanted, that I had forgotten to think about me. Not us, not we, just me. What I wanted, what made me happy. I left her office that day feeling both unsettled and strangely empowered. For the first time in a long time, I was free to make my own decisions, to shape my own future. The possibilities were terrifying, but they were also exhilarating. As the months went by, I started to venture out more. I knew I couldn't hide in my apartment forever. So, I began to reconnect with old friends, people I had drifted away from during the later years of my marriage. Some welcomed me back with open arms, while others were more cautious, unsure of how to approach me in the aftermath of my divorce. But slowly, I rebuilt those relationships, grateful for the support and understanding they offered. I also made new friends. It started with a book club I found online. A group of women who met once a month to discuss novels and drink far too much wine. At first, I was hesitant, worried that I wouldn't fit in, that I would be the odd one out. But they welcomed me with warmth and humor, and soon, I found myself looking forward to those meetings more than anything else in my week. It wasn't just the books or the wine. It was the sense of camaraderie, of belonging to a group of women who were all going through their own struggles, their own challenges. Some were single, some married, some divorced like me. But all of us were navigating life's twists and turns, and it felt good to be part of something again. Through the book club, I met Lisa, a vibrant, outspoken woman who had also recently gone through a messy divorce. We bonded over our shared experiences, and soon we were meeting up outside of the club, going for walks, grabbing coffee, or just sitting on my balcony, talking late into the night. Lisa was a force of nature, always full of energy and positivity, and being around her was a reminder that life didn't have to stop because of one heartbreak. She had already been through the darkest part of her own journey, and seeing her thrive, seeing her laugh and enjoy life again, gave me hope that I could get there too. One night, after we had polished off an entire bottle of wine between us, Lisa asked me if I had thought about dating again. I nearly choked on my drink. Dating? God no. I'm nowhere near ready for that. She laughed, a deep throaty sound. I said the same thing after my divorce. But trust me, it's not as scary as you think. And it doesn't have to be serious. Just, have some fun. You deserve that. I shook my head, feeling a mixture of amusement and dread at the idea of putting myself out there again. The thought of being vulnerable, of opening myself up to someone new was terrifying. I wasn't ready. Or maybe I just didn't want to admit that part of me was scared to try again. But Lisa's words stuck with me. I didn't need to rush into anything, but I also didn't need to close myself off to the idea of moving forward, of finding happiness again, whether that meant with someone else or just on my own. It took a while before I worked up the courage to even think about dating again. Every time I considered it, I would hear Tom's voice in the back of my mind, feel the weight of the betrayal all over again. How could I trust anyone after what had happened? How could I open myself up to that kind of pain again? But eventually I realized that holding on to that fear, letting it define me, wasn't going to help me heal. If I wanted to move on, truly move on, I had to take that first step. So one night, after weeks of Lisa's playful teasing and gentle nudges, I did something I never thought I would do. I downloaded a dating app. It felt ridiculous, surreal even, to be scrolling through profiles of strangers, trying to decide if I wanted to meet someone based on a few photos and a short bio. But I reminded myself that it was just a way to dip my toes into the water, to see what was out there. I didn't expect much. In fact, I didn't expect anything at all. I was still too guarded, too wary of getting hurt again. But it was a step forward, and that's all I needed it to be. After a few weeks of swiping and tentative messaging, I agreed to meet someone for coffee. His name was David, and he seemed nice enough, kind eyes, a friendly smile. I wasn't looking for sparks or fireworks. I just wanted to see if I could sit across from someone new and have a conversation without feeling like my heart was about to break all over again. To my surprise, the coffee date went well. It was simple, easy. We talked about our jobs, our favorite movies, even laughed about some of the more awkward parts of online dating. There was no pressure, no expectations, and by the end of it, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. David and I went on a few more dates, but we both knew early on that we weren't right for each other in a romantic sense. Still, the experience was invaluable. It showed me that I could connect with someone again, that I could open up, even if just a little. It wasn't love, but it was a beginning. As the seasons changed, so did I. The pain of the past year hadn't completely faded. There were still days when the memories of Tom's betrayal hit me like a punch to the gut, but they were becoming fewer and farther between. I was learning how to live with the scars, how to let them become a part of my story without letting them define me. I traveled for the first time in years, taking a solo trip to Italy. It was something I had always dreamed of doing, but Tom had never been interested. Now it felt like a gift I was giving to myself. A chance to explore the world on my own terms. Walking through the cobblestone streets of Florence, sipping wine in a tiny cafe, standing in awe before Michelangelo's David. Each moment felt like a reclamation of my life. I wasn't just Emma, the woman whose husband had cheated on her. I was Emma, the woman who was rediscovering her own strength, her own passions. The trip was transformative in ways I hadn't expected. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't thinking about the past. I wasn't dwelling on what I had lost. Instead, I was looking forward, excited about what the future might hold. I returned from Italy with a renewed sense of purpose. I threw myself into work, took up new hobbies, and even started volunteering at a local animal shelter. Every little thing I did felt like a step toward reclaiming my life, toward becoming the person I was always meant to be. Someone who could stand on her own. Someone who could find joy and fulfillment without needing it to come from anyone else. One evening, a few months after my trip, I was walking through a local park, enjoying the cool autumn air, when I ran into someone I hadn't expected to see: Tom. It was the first time I had seen him in almost a year. My heart raced as I spotted him sitting on a bench, his face slightly older, more worn but still familiar. He looked up as I approached, his eyes widening in surprise. For a moment we just stood there, neither of us knowing what to say. Finally, he broke the silence. "Emma," he said, his voice soft. "It's been a while." I nodded, feeling an odd mix of emotions swirling inside me. I didn't feel the anger or the heartbreak I had once carried. Instead, there was a strange sense of peace. "It has," I said, sitting down beside him on the bench. We talked for a while, catching up on our lives. He told me about his new job, how he had been working on himself, going to therapy, trying to understand his own mistakes. There was no apology, no plea for forgiveness, and I was grateful for that. It wasn't what I needed anymore. When we parted ways, I felt lighter than I had in a long time. Seeing him had been a reminder of how far I had come, of how much I had grown. He was a part of my past, but that was all he was now, a chapter in a book that I had finished reading. As I walked home that night, I realized that for the first time in a long time, I was truly ready to move forward. Not just with my life, but with my heart. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't holding on to the hurt. I was ready for whatever came next. And for the first time, I knew that whatever it was, I would be okay. Because I had found myself again. And that was enough. After that encounter with Tom, something inside me shifted. It wasn't a monumental change that happened overnight, but a slow, steady realization that I had truly moved past the worst of it. The pain of the betrayal no longer haunted me like it once did. I could think about our marriage, about everything we went through without feeling the same sharp, gut-wrenching ache. It was still there, a dull throb in the background, but it no longer controlled me. I had reclaimed my life piece by piece, and now I was beginning to realize that I had also reclaimed something else, my capacity to trust again. For so long, I had convinced myself that I would never be able to let anyone in the same way, that I would always keep people at arm's length, afraid of getting hurt. But now, as I sat in my cozy little apartment, looking out at the sunset, I realized that I didn't want to live in fear anymore. I deserved more than that. A few weeks after running into Tom, I met someone. His name was Jake, and it happened in the most unexpected way, at the grocery store of all places. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was picking out apples when I accidentally knocked over a display of oranges. They rolled across the floor, and I was mortified, crouching down to gather them as quickly as possible. That's when Jake appeared, laughing as he bent down to help me pick up the runaway oranges. "Don't worry," he said with a grin. "Happens to the best of us." I smiled, feeling a little less embarrassed, and we ended up chatting for a few minutes after we returned the oranges to their rightful place. He was easy to talk to. Funny kind, with a warmth about him that instantly put me at ease. Before I knew it, we had exchanged numbers, and he asked if I'd like to grab coffee sometime. It was simple, casual, and I found myself saying yes without hesitation. When I got home that day, I sat on the couch for a long time, staring at his number in my phone, wondering if I was really ready for this. But as I thought about it, I realized that meeting Jake hadn't felt like a monumental decision. It hadn't felt like I was taking a huge risk. It had just felt natural, like the next step in this new life I was building. Jake and I went out for coffee a few days later, and to my surprise, the conversation flowed effortlessly. It wasn't like the awkward dates I had been on before, where everything felt forced or superficial. With Jake, there was an ease, a sense of familiarity, even though we were practically strangers. We talked about our favorite books, our childhoods, our jobs. He told me about his work as a graphic designer, and I told him about my latest project at work. As we sat there sipping our coffee, I realized that for the first time in a long time, I was genuinely enjoying myself. I wasn't thinking about Tom or comparing this date to my past relationships. I was just present, fully engaged in the moment. And that felt like a victory in itself. Over the next few weeks, Jake and I continued to see each other. We went on hikes, had dinner at quirky little restaurants, and even spent an afternoon wandering through an art gallery. It was fun, light, and for the first time in a long time, I felt myself opening up to someone without the constant fear of being hurt again. But there was still a part of me that was hesitant, a part of me that wondered when the other shoe would drop. I had been burned before, and while I was doing my best to let go of the past, there were still moments when the fear crept back in. Moments when I would question if I could truly trust someone again. Jake seemed to sense this. He was patient, never pushing me for more than I was ready to give. He didn't pry into my past, didn't ask questions about my ex-husband or my divorce, though I knew he must have been curious. Instead, he let me take things at my own pace, and for that I was grateful. One evening after dinner, we were sitting on my balcony, the city lights twinkling in the distance, when Jake finally brought it up. "You don't have to tell me if you're not ready," he said gently, "but I get the feeling there's something you've been holding back. I don't want to push, but if you ever want to talk, I'm here." His words were kind, understanding, and in that moment, I felt a rush of gratitude for the way he had handled everything so far. I realized then that I didn't have to be afraid. Jake wasn't Tom. He wasn't going to hurt me, and even if things didn't work out between us, I couldn't live my life constantly waiting for the worst. So I told him. Not everything, not every painful detail, but enough. I told him about Tom, about the betrayal, about how hard it had been to rebuild my life. And Jake listened. He didn't offer platitudes or try to fix anything. He just listened, holding my hand as I spoke, and in that moment, I knew that I was going to be okay. As the months went by, Jake and I grew closer. We spent more and more time together, and slowly, I felt the walls I had built around myself begin to crumble. It wasn't easy. There were still moments of doubt, still moments when the fear of getting hurt would bubble to the surface. But with Jake, I felt safe. I felt seen. One weekend, we decided to take a trip to the coast. It was a spontaneous decision. Jake had the weekend off, and I was craving an escape from the city. We packed up his car and drove to a small beach town a few hours away. It was the kind of place that felt frozen in time, with its quaint little shops and old-fashioned boardwalk. The salty sea air was invigorating, and as we walked along the shoreline, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. That evening we sat on the beach, watching the sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange. Jake turned to me, his eyes soft, and said something I wasn't expecting. "I love you." The words hung in the air between us, and for a moment I was frozen. It had been so long since anyone had said those words to me, so long since I had allowed myself to believe in them. But as I looked at Jake, I realized that I had been falling for him too. Slowly, carefully, but undeniably. "I love you too," I whispered, my heart pounding in my chest. It was a simple exchange, but it felt monumental. For the first time since Tom, I had opened my heart to someone new. And instead of fear, all I felt was joy. As Jake and I settled into this new chapter of our relationship, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I had come. Just a year ago, I had been in the depths of despair, convinced that I would never be able to trust anyone again, let alone fall in love. But here I was in a healthy, loving relationship with a man who treated me with kindness and respect. It wasn't perfect, of course. No relationship is. There were still moments when my insecurities would flare up, when I would find myself questioning if I was truly ready for this. But Jake was patient, always willing to talk things through, always reassuring me that we were in this together. One day, during one of our long talks, I brought up something that had been weighing on my mind. "Do you ever think about the future?" I asked, my voice tentative. Jake smiled, reaching for my hand. "Of course I do. But I don't want to rush you, Emma. We've got all the time in the world." His answer was exactly what I needed to hear. He wasn't pushing for more than I was ready to give. He was willing to take things one step at a time, just like I was. And that made all the difference. As the seasons changed, so did I. I no longer defined myself by the pain of my past, no longer allowed Tom's betrayal to shape my view of love or relationships. Instead, I focused on the present, on the life I was building with Jake, and on the person I was becoming. As time went on, Jake and I grew even closer. We started talking about moving in together, about the future we could build. But unlike before, I didn't feel the need to rush anything. I wasn't chasing an idealized version of love, or trying to fill a void. I was simply enjoying what we had, and that was enough. My friendships had grown stronger too. Lisa, who had been my rock during the darkest days, had become like a sister to me. We still met up regularly, laughing over wine, talking about our lives and how far we had come. I knew I could count on her just as she could count on me, and that sense of community, of belonging, was something I cherished deeply. I was also closer with my family now. After the divorce, I had withdrawn from them, too ashamed and too broken to let them in. But now, I was rebuilding those bonds, allowing myself to be vulnerable again, to let people in without fear. There were still days when I thought about Tom, of course. There were still moments when the memories of what we had shared would surface, unbidden. But they didn't hurt the way they once did. They were just memories now, part of a life that I had lived, but no longer a life that I was trapped in. On a crisp autumn afternoon, almost 2 years after my divorce, Jake and I took a trip back to the same beach where we had first said, "I love you." As we walked along the shoreline, hand in hand, I realized just how far I had come. The woman I had been 2 years ago felt like a distant memory, a shadow of someone who had been lost in pain and heartache. Now I was stronger. I had rebuilt my life brick by brick, and I had found happiness again, both within myself and with Jake. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow across the water, Jake turned to me, his face serious. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box, and my heart skipped a beat. "Emma," he said, his voice soft but steady, I've waited a long time to ask you this because I wanted to make sure it was the right time, the right moment. You've been through so much, and I know how hard it was for you to trust again. But I love you more than anything, and I can't imagine my life without you." He opened the box, revealing a simple, elegant ring. "Will you marry me?" Tears welled up in my eyes as I looked at him, at the man who had been so patient, so kind, so understanding. This wasn't the life I had planned. It wasn't the path I had expected to walk. But in that moment, I realized that it was even better. "Yes," I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. "Yes, I will." As Jake slipped the ring onto my finger, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. This was a new beginning, a new chapter in my life, and for the first time in a long time, I was excited about the future. Because I knew that no matter what challenges came our way, I had the strength to face them. I had found myself, and in doing so I had found love again. And that was more than I could have ever hoped for. In the months following our engagement, Jake and I began planning our wedding. It was a simple affair, just close friends and family, held in the garden of a quaint little bed and breakfast by the sea. As the date drew closer, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this moment. There had been so much pain, so much heartbreak. But there had also been healing, growth, and the discovery of a strength I hadn't known I possessed. I had learned that love wasn't about perfection or fairy tale endings. It was about showing up for each other, even when things were hard. It was about forgiveness, both of others and of ourselves. As I stood in front of the mirror on the morning of my wedding, dressed in a simple flowing gown, I felt a sense of contentment wash over me. This wasn't the wedding I had once dreamed of. It was better. It was real, grounded in everything I had learned and everything I had overcome. When I walked down the aisle with the sound of the waves crashing in the background, I saw Jake standing there, his eyes filled with love and warmth, and I knew that this was where I was meant to be. The vows we exchanged were simple, heartfelt, and true. We promised to love each other, to support each other, to face whatever life threw at us together. As Jake kissed me, sealing our vows, I felt the final piece of the puzzle fall into place. This was the life I had built for myself, the life I had chosen, and it was filled with love, with hope, and with a future that I couldn't wait to embrace. And for the first time in a long time I felt whole.